Hello and welcome to Newsmax TV. Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform, ATR, a group he founded in 1985 at the request of then-President Ronald Reagan, joins us now. He's here to talk with us about comprehensive immigration reform and other topics. Grover, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
So the big meeting Tuesday is labeled Americans for Reform, Immigration Reform for Our Economy, Faith and Security. A lot of pundits have said this fight we've had over Obamacare and the government shutdown have pushed immigration reform too far down the agenda to make it politically feasible to expect Congress to deal with it this year. I presume you disagree.
I do. Look, we had a discussion about debt ceiling, the continuing resolution. There was an effort to get the president to abolish Obamacare. He said politely no. So now we've moved that off a few months. What happens in a few months on debt and continuing resolution will keep the sequester, the spending limits that we won in 2011 that keep spending down. The president doesn't like that. The Democrats don't like it, but it's the law of the land. They can't change it. We will not raise taxes. So we'll probably just go for the next year with spending at the limits that the sequester puts. There might be some delay of parts of Obamacare, not because the Republicans have the power to force the Democratic Senate and the Democratic president to bend to their will, but because Obamacare is doing so poorly, the Ds may want to back off. So what's going to happen is kind of set, which actually opens up the playing field for immigration reform. This is a position that Ronald Reagan and Jack Kemp and the business community and the badges, the police and law enforcement community wants to do immigration. And more recently, the faith communities, evangelical Protestants, the National Baptist Convention, the Jewish community, the Roman Catholics. All the major faith communities are in favor of comprehensive reform, as are the free market economists, the businesses, and the farmers. Big issue for farmers in rural areas to get the economy moving and moving forward.
You also mentioned in that title, national security, the third leg of the Reagan stool, if you will. Tell me about how national security comes into immigration reform.
We have a better immigration law than most countries, not than Canada perhaps, but most countries. It's been our strength. The reason why America is the future is because we are a growing population. Europe is shrinking because we assimilate immigrants over the last 300 years of American life. Are there always complaints about the latest immigrant group? Absolutely. People have been complaining about immigrants since the Germans started sneaking into Pennsylvania in the 1700s, and people whined about that. So why is Japan not the future? Remember when 1980s Japan was going to eat our lunch and we were finished? They don't do immigration. Their culture doesn't allow it, and their population, working population, is already shrinking. The total population is falling. China, with all the people in China, is going to start to decline as a nation because they're not having kids and they can't do immigration. We can. It is our competitive advantage in making us, it has made us the most powerful nation in the world. Freedom plus immigration has made us grow and be rich and prosperous and powerful, and we need more talent and more farm workers and more young people to be able to come in legally, not illegally, but legally. That's why we need to reform the present laws, which are not as good as they need to be.
Okay, so let's take a closer look at those fiscal issues that you've raised. As you know, there's a lot of people on the grassroots right who are concerned that immigrants are going to drain the public treasury, that they're going to cost money because they'll need health care or they'll need social services. It sounds, however, like you're pointing to the economic benefits of a growing economy, a growing society, and saying that it could actually have an impact on lowering taxes for Americans or keeping them from at least going higher. Is that your view?
Well, it's the reality of history in the United States. More people, more growth, higher standards of living throughout 300 years. We have two problems, and many problems in the United States, but two that you're talking about on economics. Our entitlement system is broken. and it's going bankrupt. If there were no foreign countries in the entire world, if there was no immigration, all of our entitlements are going bankrupt because they're structured poorly. We have an entitlement problem that the Paul Ryan plan fixes. Immigration has nothing to do with that problem. The entitlements need to be fixed. We have a welfare problem. The people that welfare damages, that they locked into welfare dependency, most of them were born in this country. If there were no other countries, if there were no immigrants in the entire world, our welfare system needs to be fixed. Our education system is not up to snuff. The government runs schools with labor unions interfering with kids getting an education. Again, if there were no immigrants, this needs to be fixed. We need to reform education, reform welfare, and reform our entitlements. Those are very important. But to blame those three failures that Congress and state governments screwed up over the last 20, 30 years with immigrants, they just got here. They're not responsible for bad laws we have. We need to reform those, and the Paul Ryan plan does just that. Immigration is part of the solution, not part of the problem.
So let's say, on the other hand, Republicans and Democrats in Congress take sort of the easy way out. They kick the decision down the road, and reform is delayed. They don't even take it up until, let's suppose, 2014. What would the political implications be for Republicans if that happens, in your view?
Well, in point of fact, it's the Democrats who have refused to do immigration reform. Obama was president, Democratic House, Democratic Senate, every day of 2009. They didn't do immigration reform. Every day of 2010, 2 full years, complete Democrat liberal control of the House, Senate, and the presidency. They didn't do immigration reform. They didn't even think about it. Okay? So they didn't do it. The idea this is some liberal plot is silly. If they want to do it, they would have done it. They didn't. We are now moving forward, and they're trying to use the establishment media to blame conservatives and Republicans for any failure to pass immigration reform. In point of fact, in 2007, 2008, when President Bush wanted to do immigration reform, it was a guy in the Senate named Barack Obama who had the killer amendment that the labor union bosses gave him, which killed immigration reform then. So this is a Reagan Republican set of reforms. I know some people have been listening to headlines and not reading the stories, but this is a Reagan Republican reform that is pro-growth, helpful to security, getting us a secure border, making us a richer and stronger and more prosperous and more powerful country. What's not to like about all of those things? And we need to get that done sooner rather than later. What the Democrat game plan is to kill immigration reform and use the three networks and the establishment press to blame the Republicans, so that then immigrant communities, not just Hispanics, but Asian Americans and Indian Americans and others, to blame Republicans for the Democrats' refusal to do immigration reform. It's very important to do it for the economy, but it's also important not to be jammed politically by the left blaming Republicans and conservatives for their failure to do immigration reform.
Well, let me ask you this. Politically, what do you say to grassroots folks who say that, in effect, what would be happening if you set up a pathway that ultimately leads to citizenship is that you would be setting up a mechanism whereby you would be adding millions of voters who, demographically speaking, would be expected to then vote in disproportionate numbers for Democrats?
Sure. One could have said that about every ethnic group coming into the United States throughout its history, and yet we have 30 Republican governors, 25 states with a Republican governor, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate, representing 165 million Americans. We have most Americans living in Republican-controlled states. This is after 300 years of immigration that people warned us against. The other part of that is that the immigration reform, even that the Senate put forward, and the House will put forward something that I think will be an improvement, it's 13 years where you can work. You have to make sure you don't have any crimes. You have to have a better driving record than some of our elected officials do in order to stay in the country. It's 13 years before you could even really apply to become a citizen. So we're not talking about legalizing large quantities of people yet in terms of voting, becoming citizens tomorrow. This is 13 years from now. At that point, we will have passed the Ryan budget plan. We would have reformed immigration, reformed our education, and reformed entitlement. If we don't do that in the next 10 years anyway, we're in deep trouble as a country, we will certainly get that passed before any new collection of people get citizenship because of these reforms.
Always a fascinating discussion. Grover Norquist, President of Americans for Tax Reform, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.